Hello and welcome to today's episode of Stand Up, where I am having a conversation with the great Barry Ritholtz, who is one of your all-time favorite guests here on the show, talking about finance and economics and supply chain issues, the Supreme Court, markets, recession possibilities, and then at the end, Barry and I discuss the loss of his 86-year-old mother. It's a great conversation, as it always is, with Ritholtz, and I think you're going to love it. Now, I hope that you had a good weekend and maybe you did something fun on the day off. Obviously, I think a lot of people are making great points about how this Independence Day is a lot different. Happy Independence Day for who is the question a lot of people are asking, with the Supreme Court decisions on environmental protections and voting rights, and abortion rights, and LGBTQ TQ rights and Miranda rights and so many other things that seem to be up in the air given this court and the events that we're seeing unfolding culturally, politically, actual climate, media, all of it, the pandemic, so much going on this Independence Day. And that is what this show is here to unpack for you each and every day. We're going to continue to go into all of those different issues and the ones that you are, and I am, of course, struggling with ourselves and our own lives and our own families. And I'm going to continue to do a lot more of that. So I hope you're doing okay. I think you'll like this conversation with Barry Ritholtz. I've got some great conversations coming up the rest of the week with the ladies from The Hue, who I sat down with. I'll put that up tomorrow. I've got Jill Filipovich and Tamar Haspel, who are both joining me on the show, which you're going to love, and much, much more that I'll have this week. As always, what should we be talking about? Who should we be talking to? Maybe it's you. Pete Coe is going on a trip to Scandinavia. He's going to be doing segments from there. If you have other or any contributions to the show, you should pitch them to me. Criticisms as well, ideas, anything. Vitamin N pictures, I need those. Where are all those nature pictures that you're taking over the weekend? Send them all to me at standupwithpete@gmail.com. Okay, let's get to it, shall we? Barry Ritholtz, Ritholtz.com, the Big Picture blog. Check that out. Check out his book, Bailout Nation. Check out his podcast, Masters in Business. He's awesome on Twitter and social media, @Ritholtz. He's a real good friend of mine, and here is our latest right now.
Right. And I have this gray hair on the top of my head, and you have this gray hair on the bottom of your head.
Oh, yeah. What do we
If you stood on your head, we'd look very similar. Although you're grayer than me.
Yeah, yeah. Well, in the beard, for sure. Probably on the head. Yeah.
My wife pointed out to me yesterday, this guy, no, actually it was Wednesday night, full head of gray hair and like dark brown eyebrows. And I'm an idiot. I'm like, so what do you think? It's just genetics? She's like, schmuck. He dyes his eyebrows. I'm like, okay, but his top of his head is like a shock of white.
I mean, you don't know
just
that.
Funny.
You don't know that he dyes his eyebrows. She can't be so sure.
I don't, but she does.
Interesting. I wouldn't
know that shit.
I wouldn't die on that hill. But between you and I think that.
How do you spell that?
D-Y-E.
D-Y-E? Well, there you go. So I just grabbed something to snack on before, and I had a flashback to stopping off at the Financier Bakery and bringing goodies to the office at XM Satellite and tormenting you.
Well,
chewing.
You were not only the only reason you were tormenting me is because I knew you were tormenting the people listening to us. You were on a microphone with a croissant in your mouth, smacking about in there.
Whatever was the loudest possible food, right?
You would break it. You would break like a flaky croissant on the mic.
So much fun.
Oh,
because you wouldn't eat, and everybody else in the studio was eating.
Because they weren't on a microphone, and I was. I always would eat them during the commercials. I wasn't opposed to eat them. I don't understand why this is such a controversy to you.
It's funny. It was funny.
It was. It was always fun.
Always cracked me up.
Always cracked me up. All right, what are you popping into your mouth?
Organic dried mango bites.
Oh, good for you. Those are good. All right, well, I want to record.
Like, it's funny because I have all these different brands because my favorite brand has been still unavailable.
Is that because of the supply chain?
I guess.
So let's talk about the supply chain issue first. Have you learned anything new on the blog at The Big Picture? You shared this great Wall Street Journal kind of hour-long YouTube documentary looking into it.
Yeah, wasn't that neat?
I only saw the top of it, but I'm very much looking forward to watching the whole thing because, I mean, it seems like it would probably be pretty fascinating. But what are your thoughts about that or the current state of the supply chain with Ritholtz?
So, like everything else in life, it's complicated. And we want these simple answers and blame that guy. But it doesn't really work that way. When you look at all the factors that led to the current supply chain problem, we really aren't talking about the single biggest problem, which is just-in-time inventory and offshoring. And the concept that, I don't need a warehouse, I don't need inventory, I'll just outsource the manufacturing of this to somewhere else, and I'll have this robust logistical operations that will allow whatever I need to arrive just at the moment I need it. And that works great until there's a war or a pandemic. And lo and behold, we have both.
Don't you think that just from an efficiency and profitability standard, companies are going to understand, big multinationals and everywhere else, the uncertainty that we now live with, especially when it comes to climate related issues, because you got to imagine weather is going to affect supply chain, or anything from a hurricane to a tornado to obviously drought. So do they shift away from that economic idea of just in time? Just in time
inventory.
Yeah.
Meaning you're putting a bunch of things together and I need one of these and it just shows up.
Which is a newish, people probably heard about it. We don't need to really explain, I'm sure.
It's been going on for decades. I mean, it's not brand spanking new, and it's one of the key drivers of sending manufacturing offshore. You're really asking me, hey, when are people going to figure out how to think and how to operate and how to be more clever about how the world operates? And I don't know the answer to that. That's one of my favorite challenges. Some people do, some people don't. And, when you look at the most successful entities, and whether they're organizations or companies or what have you, the ones that figure this out soonest do best. And so, when you look at an Amazon or a Google or an Apple, or even, a Target or a Walmart, the companies that figure out how to adapt to current day realities are the ones that do best. FedEx is probably a great example of this. They figured out years ago, hey, there's no money doing packages for Amazon. So they dropped out. Like, imagine being in the shipping business and saying, oh, the world's largest shipper of goods? Yeah, we don't want to do business with them. That's like second order of magnitude thinking, second level thinking, where it's not just how do I get more business, more. It's like, how do I do smarter business, and who do I want to do business with, and who is going to be expensive and time consuming and costly and not worth it. And I think a lot of businesses don't get to that level. That's a sort of luxury that a lot of companies don't get to even enter that thought process. They're so busy chasing their tails, they don't stop and realize what's going on. And I just think that's human nature. It's not organizational.
Well, the other thing is human nature.
How people operate.
The other thing is human nature, certainly in an economic system like ours, whatever you want to call it, is that human nature will dictate that you'll use the supply chain issues against your competitors. And I know that you had something on the blog about, I think it was Intel chips, or maybe I read that at CNBC when I was preparing to talk to you, but how are companies using the supply chain issues as leverage to compete with each other? And at what point does manufacturing start to change in terms of curing the issues that are causing the supply chain? Like, at what point do you start making shit here, like antibiotics or microconductors or whatever the hell? I don't know what I'm talking about.
I mean, there's the most recent bit of legislation has all sorts of incentives for building semiconductors in the United States. And it's not even automobiles. It's just national defense. They're so crucial to every aspect of our high-tech military, hey, maybe having a future potential enemy not manufacture these things is a great idea.
The Bipartisan Innovation Act is what Ritholtz is mentioning. Yep. A multi-billion-dollar investment into U.S. That's all about just the semiconductor industry to kind of get. I got it. Sorry, go ahead.
Like where socks and underwear are made, not really national security issues, but where the key brains of all of your. Just look at some of the anti-tank weaponry that's the U.S. weaponry that's being deployed by the Ukrainians against the Russians. Right. I mean, but for this high-tech stuff, it's an amazing equalizer. One soldier with a 40-pound javelin on his shoulder and an assistant carrying a bunch of ammo refills can take out half a dozen tanks. It's so asymmetric and so powerful. We could talk a long time about the Ukrainian war, the Russian invasion, but the takeaway is Russia is a paper tiger with nukes, so they're not that much of a paper tiger, but their conventional military is terrible, and it is much easier to defend the eastern borders of Europe now that we've seen how ineffective they are against an overmatched weak country, that, there's going to be a thorough rethink of war tactics. The next time Russia invades a country, I doubt it's just going to be with a bunch of tanks rolling in. It's going to be something else. So there are a lot of lessons from this. But the key is in 2022, World War II tactics may not be the most effective.
Yeah. Well, what about? Well, you're talking about the. All right. Well, let me move on from supply chain just to talk about how, if at all, I didn't see your writing. Maybe you tweeted about this. How are you seeing the Supreme Court decisions that have been being made by Magneto and the Medieval Six in terms of how they affect markets, how they affect the economy? I mean, many of these decisions certainly affect the way that business can behave. You can talk about crime with the gun thing, and obviously yesterday, this hall of villains, cartoon villains of a Supreme Court shat out a decision that said the Environmental Protection Agency could not protect the environment. How have these Supreme Courts, these rogues, affected markets, the economy? How do you see that? And obviously, I'm happy to hear your political take or your human rights take, whatever you want. But what are your thoughts?
So a couple of ways to look at this. The first is, I mean, the original sin of the EPA was founded by that far left liberal guy, Richard Nixon. So that's number one. Look, I've been reluctant to talk about this because it feels like I'm sort of piling on. And every now and then I start writing something and then I am like, oh, no one's going to believe that. And I put it away. And then 5 or 10 years later, I regret not writing it. The reason I'm in finance and not a practicing attorney was I came to the conclusion as an appellate lawyer, which is what I did, that the Supreme Court was just a partisan group of hacks. And the reprieve we got from the initial century of the Supreme Court, first taking power for itself in Marbury versus Madison, and then managing somehow to retain legitimacy when this isn't a partisan from the left or the right. There was, for most of their history, they've been a group of partisan hacks. There was a window that started in the late 19th century and ran pretty much up until World War II, where suddenly, it seems, the Supreme Court had become this beautiful, majestic group of philosopher kings writing these amazing analyses of the Constitution and fundamental rights. And I'm not even going as far as where we started to agree politically in the 60s and 70s. I mean, just the Felix Frankfurter, I'm trying to remember, the whole run of justices, Benjamin Cardozo. There's just a run of justices in the teens and 20s and 30s that just the full majesty of the law in a constitutional system recognizing that their role is to protect the individual rights while balancing the rest of the obligations. That's what makes you want to be a lawyer. That's what makes you fall in love with the law. And then you start to see what happens later in history. And I'm like, oh, this whole system has always been corrupt. And you're looking at a brief aberration. That's the exception, not the rule. And so if ever you needed if you harbored any doubt that the Supreme Court is nothing more than 9 political hacks, some of whom are hackier than others, just look at what's taken place. To me, I watched some of the hearings when these justices were getting sworn in. I think not all of the people who voted to overturn Roe v. Wade, but at least 2 of them perjured themselves in the Senate. Yeah. You want to split. I know I've had this discussion with a conservative lawyer who was being very, very technical and very, very, arguing that, well, really it wasn't. I'm like, dude, they said Roe was precedent and he wasn't going to overturn it. And he did. That's perjury. You want to really slice and dice it as fine as you can. Go ahead. But it's perjury. And so, the chart I have teed up for the Sunday reads is the Supreme Court's approval rating, which has historically been an institution that had a much higher than other political institutions' ratings. It's fallen to record lows. I just recognized.
I just read right before we talked that in the latest Supreme Court approval opinion poll, they have less of an approval than Biden, and his approval is like in the high 30s or something, meaning
right. It's shocking.
Extrapolate whatever you want.
I mean, they're still above Congress, but not much. And I think the last run of so first of all, the filibuster isn't in the Constitution anywhere. But what is in the Constitution is the right of the executive and Congress to set up rules around the Supreme Court, including when their session is, how many members there are. And originally, I thought the idea of either court packing or court unpacking, saying, all right, now the Supreme Court is going to be a 3-person tribunal or a 25-person. I always thought that was ridiculous. Now it's not. And there are some noted judicial scholars who are basically saying the Supreme Court has gone rogue.
Oh, yeah. I mean,
this is not a good thing for the American right. So now you have radical extremists who don't believe in democracy, very much in charge of a number of important states. You have a group of radicals driving. Justice Roberts, he and I don't agree politically on a lot of things, but he's an institutionalist, and he's much more concerned about protecting the legacy and the ongoing credibility of the Supreme Court. And then as soon as they got numbers, suddenly Clarence Thomas, who hasn't said anything for decades, is now running the show. It's quite amazing.
Just to be clear, except for Roberts' certainly long march to attack and destroy voting rights in America, which I think was
helps to hold us up.
You can't get away with the kind of, we disagree on a lot of things with Roberts, who, if you really want to think about it, he basically overturned the entire U.S. Senate. The U.S. Senate voted to approve the Voting Rights Act like 98 to 2 or 0, I think, under George W. Bush.
Well, it's all good now. There's no more racism and there's no more
Roberts,
voting
other than
oppression.
That. Yeah, so how does any of this, though, affect economics? Does it affect the markets? Are the markets today reacting to Roe v. Wade or being overturned?
Not really. I think the markets are concerned about the rule of law because the rule of law turns out to be worth trillions and trillions of dollars in our corporate market cap. And the question is, can the U.S. economic post-war miracle continue when you're past the point of no return and you're becoming more of a minority rule nation? Like, is the U.S. more akin to the U.S., the South Africa or freer nations? And I mean, South Africa under apartheid.
Yeah.
You have look, the Senate by design was a compromise, and it ensures minority rule or potentially ensures minority rule, at least in one house. But then the Supreme Court has repeatedly allowed gerrymandering, so you lose the ability to honestly elect representative government. By the way, as an attorney and as someone who studied constitutional law, when you read some of the contortions that the court has had to put itself through, the whole gun control thing is just a joke, and that started under who was the guy
that was Heller,
which justice?
That was
which
Scalia.
Justice was killed by the CIA in order to allow Obama to Scalia, right? Scalia,
I think he was smothered by a pillow. People say,
right. So I remember actually debating this in law school, saying, that's not what the Constitution. Listen, if you want to make stuff up, if you want to say I'm going to legislate from the bench because I'm in favor of AK-15s or I'm in favor of guns, well, okay, that's what you're doing, but don't tell me that that's in the Constitution. You have to read the entire Second Amendment.
Well, they would tell you don't know the difference between an AK-47 and an AR-15, which you just conflated.
AR-15, right? AK, exactly. I conflated the two. So that's just look. It's I felt this way for a long time, and it's why I shifted careers. But 9 human beings have as their fundamental and fatal flaw the fact that they're 9 human beings. And they're corrupt, and they're power grubbing, and they're myopic, and they suffer from all the confirmation biases and all of the issues that we've talked about behaviorally as everybody else. And so when you step back and you law school was fascinating. I really love law school.
Well, by the way, which is why they shouldn't have lifetime tenure, just to be clear.
So then we should change that. And I think that's really important. By the way, lifetime tenure is a bad idea for anybody. Speaking. The exception being, now here's the thing:
Kings
you don't want judges running on certain platforms every couple of years and currying favor. And you have the opposite of minority rule. You have the oppression, the tyranny of the majority oppressing the minority. Right. And think about how things were in terms of gay rights and gay marriages, or, that was the tyranny of the majority for a long time. And so there are certain benefits for appointing people for longer terms, maybe not for life, but for 7 or 10 or 15 years. So they're not running every 2 years like Congress, and therefore very susceptible to whatever.
There's a better way to do it. There's a shorter time periods, but the Senate is 6 years, exactly House is 2, and you could do something similar to the Supreme Court. You also, need to talk about how old they are as well. But we can belabor all that another time. I want to ask.
So let me give you one little bit before we move on for the Supreme Court. Let me give you one little bit of reasons to be optimistic about this. I look at this as a wild overreaction from a group of ideologues and partisans who have come to recognize that their way of life is going away.
Yes.
And that when you look at, issues, it wasn't like it was 1,000 years ago that whites and blacks couldn't marry. Forget gay marriage. A white man couldn't marry a black woman, or vice versa, or heaven forbid a black man marry a white woman. That was illegal. It was only a half a century ago or so that was overturned. And so, what's the line? The arc of history is long and bends towards justice. When on all of these issues where the Supreme Court has either taken away fundamental rights or constrained fundamental rights, the younger you go in the demographic setup, the younger you ask people, the much more progressive, open, liberal, free thinking they are. Old people are, the Supreme Court is essentially representing a group of people who are, hey, you kids, get off my lawn.
Yes.
They don't like any of these freedoms. Yes. They really don't. And so in the arc of history, a lot of these people are going to be looked at in extremely bad terms. I wish I'm here 200 years from now just to see how the Clarence Thomases of the world or the Brett Kavanaughs are perceived by history. I'm pretty confident it's not going to be well, to say nothing of who Trump is going to be lumped into. But hold all of that aside. If you could step out of your own lifespan for a moment and look back, this is like a spasm pushing back against the inexorable mark of progress. At least that's how it looks like to me when I take a 40,000-foot view. And it's a lot of this goes back to the fact that because of the financial crisis in 08-09, the Republicans became unelectable, and the United States probably pulled forward its first elected African-American president by maybe a generation early, and that caused all of these spasmings that we're seeing. This like running around hair on fire, oh my God, black man in the White House. And so this is all seems to be an outgrowth of that. Yeah. And I don't know how long it lasts. Maybe it's a generation, maybe it's a couple of years. But the current circumstance doesn't appear to be sustainable socially. And we're heading, like, I'm not rooting for a civil war like some of the Proud Boys and Bannonites and Trumpers and the real hardcore wackadoos are. But there is some sort of a crescendo we're building towards. And I don't know what that is, and I don't know what we look like afterwards. But the status quo really seems unsustainable.
Fully agree, and I wish I had an understatement sound effect. But you're never one to set your hair on fire or your fire on hair, I think I was going to say.
Right.
And I appreciate that calmness and maturity and patience about you. But let me now move to the markets. We're talking here in the 1st of July. So it's 2022. It's the 1st of July, and the S&P 500. If you look at a chart there, it's really gone down for months, for the year. It's been down historically, like over, I don't know. You can talk about the way, however you want to frame it. But I only look at the markets this way right before I talk to you or other people, and I don't look at them every day the way a lot of folks do, and it drives them crazy. You told me not to do that, so I don't do it. So what do you want to say about where we're at here at the beginning of July, and why did the market bottom out kind of in the last 24 hours?
Well, I would love if we bottomed out.
Bottomed out.
I don't know why
it just took a real downward spike. Sorry, I don't know.
So first, let's begin with normal market cycles. Down 10% happens once or twice a year. Mm-hmm. Down 20% is every 3 years. Down 5% is normally a substantial issue. We've had a fantastic run following the financial crisis. Maybe not the economy, but the stock market has. You look at where we bottomed in March 2009 at 666 on the S&P 500. Well, here we are at 6 or 7 times that amount, at 38,800 just about. And so you've had a huge run with only a couple of minor setbacks. The fourth quarter of 2018, we were down about 20%. You had the 34% drop that lasted a month, fastest pullback and recovery ever in the beginning of the pandemic.
Right.
And then you have two things happen. So 2020 and 2021, both substantial years, up 20% in 2020. Even with that 34% drop, you're up 21%, and then 28% in 2021. And during the entirety of 2021, we didn't have so much as a 5% pullback. That was it. We were always very low volatility, just going higher and higher. Why is this? Well, you have a massive fiscal stimulus, which we didn't have in the financial crisis, which would have led to a much healthier recovery if we would have had some numbers. The first CARES Act was a record, was $2.2 trillion. That's more than 10% of GDP. We have never had a fiscal stimulus that large in American history. So that was great for the stock market and pretty good for the economy. Then that was under President Trump. Then the second CARES Act was another $900 million, also under President Trump. And then the next CARES Act under Biden was $1.9 trillion. So more or less about $5 trillion coursing through the economy. And not surprising, some of this is one of many, many factors that led to inflation. I just actually wrote something. What are the 15 prime causes of blameworthy for inflation. And so at a certain point, the regime changes. Hey, now we have a lot of inflation and then rates are no longer low. So the Federal Reserve starts raising rates and it's not having any impact. And then they raise more rates. And then it's like, you know what? Maybe the way we'll kill inflation is by causing a recession. And that makes people very nervous. So you have that going on for the past 8 months. And at the same time, you have rates going up from the lowest levels in history, from essentially zero around in the United States and negative around the world. And which essentially means that bonds have nowhere else to go. People have been forecasting that bonds were going to start falling, meaning rates are going to go higher, bond values are going to go lower for 15 years, 10 years. They've been wrong the whole time. Well, it finally started happening this year. So what makes 2022 so unusual is the first 6 months, not only do you have stocks down double digits, you have bonds down double digits. So really, there's no place to hide. And the last time we saw that was 1981, where you had stocks and bonds both down more than 10%. You could say that this combination of the other factor that's fascinating in this is for most of the past 50 years, low-end wages, especially minimum wage, have been deflationary, meaning we're paying the poorest people in the country so little that they're still in technically poverty level, but that's great for our inflation levels because wages not going up means that a key component of the economy is deflationary, not inflationary. Well, guess what happened if you give people a year at home and a ton of money and say, do what you want? Yeah. A lot of those people figure out, hey, I'm going to raise my skill level. I'm going to get approved, certified, authorized, whatever. We've seen record new business formations. We've seen all sorts of things going on. And so what normally, and at the same time, we've curtailed immigration, who usually take the lowest paid jobs.
Great point.
This has been ongoing for decades, but it really accelerated under Trump in 2016, and shockingly has continued under Biden in 2020. He just never bothered undoing the Trump restrictions on immigration, which is shocking. So you have a perfect storm of all these terrible things happening. And normally we applaud when the lowest paid people in the country start to see raises. After 40 years of it being a subsidy to everybody else at the expense of the poorest workers, now it's the opposite. Right. Now the poorest workers have seen their minimum wage unofficially go up to $15, and now people are complaining. The ironic thing is, if the Chamber of Congress and other lobbyists that haven't fought to keep minimum wage artificially low for decades, lower than inflation, lower than cost of living, lower than C-suite pay, lower than productivity, lower than corporate profits, if they had been allowed to normalize a big chunk of what we're seeing in wage inflation and in unavailability of workers, which are also contributing to, hey, if you don't got the truck driver, the goods aren't going to show up.
Right.
That we don't talk about that enough, but we really should. This is what you wanted. You said we want to keep wages down, and you were only able to fight market forces for half a century. And then this pandemic comes along, and now you're screwed because wages are trying to go to where the marketplace is taking them, and you can no longer artificially keep them suppressed. And so, we don't talk enough about the various decisions made along the way that had unintended consequences. If you think, all right, I'm going to just fight this one increase in minimum wage in 1982, all right, so what's the impact of that? Maybe not a lot. But then if you set up a think tank and fund them and you're constantly opposing for decades, at a certain point, either you're going to be fucked or the rest of us are going to be fucked. And that's kind of what's happened here. This is the chickens coming home for roost. And I've talked about Walmart and McDonald's many times about this over the years, but it's more than them. It's the Chamber of Congress. Chamber of Commerce. And it's effectively everybody who lobbied against minimum wage increases on the federal level for decades and decades and decades. When you can't get certain parts, some amount of blame goes to those folks.
And just the overall lobbying against government regulations from the financial industry, which you wrote an entire book about, not specifically just the regulations, but how they affected the economy, to what we saw yesterday with the Supreme Court saying that Congress doesn't have the right to give the power to the EPA, in this case, to regulate the environment. I mean, this deregulatory...
Isn't that amusing?
This march of
think about how tormented that decision is, because, wait, didn't Congress pass the EPA?
Yeah.
What the Supreme Court actually said in that decision is, you don't have the right to tell an entity you set up how to run legislation that you directed it to execute. Because essentially, how else are they supposed to do it? Are we going to have a congressional committee to sign off on every new variation of every new chemical that comes out? It's patently absurd, and it just goes to show you once again that what was once an august and well-respected body is completely rogue. It's out of its gourd. I think this ends in bloodshed in certain corners of the country. I think things are going to eventually get out of hand. That's the concern.
They're already, just to be clear,
or at least it's increasing the possibility that happens.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And we've already seen bloodshed. Let's be clear. A lot of these protests and other places, just in terms of, my friend Jill Filipovich wrote a great piece just about how many attacks on abortion clinics there have been. The only word to refer to those people over the years, by terrorists. So we have a new kind of terrorist. It's domestic.
Terrorist,
it's not new.
100%.
It's not new. It's been here forever, especially if you're a person of color. I just also read an article about how many lynchings there were in like a 20-year period from Reconstruction to, I think, like Jim Crow, or I'm getting it wrong, but it's like 6,000. There have always been white supremacist terrorists.
Again, back to minority rule. Yeah. So there are people who pretend there are people who pretend they are patriots, but really they don't believe in democracy.
They're hatriots, I say, with an H. How about this? Recession. Everybody's talking about the R word. I saw some headlines about it today with which Fed was this? Georgia? I don't know.
No, Atlanta does this thing called GDP Now, which is relatively new. They created it a couple of years ago, and they know what goes into the GDP data out of the Commerce Department, and so they try and do something called nowcasting, which is based on the information we have at hand, here's where GDP would be if it was put out right this moment. And so two things to note about that. First, I don't know where this 2 quarters of negative GDP came from, but it's the wrong definition. It's not the definition of a recession that's been used for decades and decades and decades. For example, you didn't have 2 negative quarters of GDP back to back, 2 consecutive quarters of negative GDP in either the 2001 recession or the 08-09 recession. So that just goes to show you how wacky that would be as a definition. But second, what GDP Now shows is real growth numbers, meaning inflation adjusted. So it's not showing you the economy, it's showing you the economy and inflation, which, again, doesn't mean that we're in a contraction. So people kind of get hung up on that. If you look at a number of other indicators as to inflation, the last time I looked last month, into the economic activity, the Philadelphia Fed keeps track of the economic expansion or contraction of each of the 50 states. Last month, all 50 states were expanding. You can't be in a recession if all 50 states are expanding. And historically, it takes a while to drop down to 48, 42, 40. By the time you break low 40s, high 30s, the odds of, meaning there's 38 states expanding, but 12 of them are contracting, that suggests you're much closer to recession. Right now, we're not near there. There's also something known as the Somm rule, my friend Claudia Somm, that looks at the increase in unemployment from its lowest levels. When that pops up substantially, and I think she uses a 0.5 percentage point as her number, it's a good indicator that you're on recession watch. And we still have unemployment at or near all-time lows. Inverted yield curve is really the only major indicator saying there's a recession somewhere out in the future. And as of now, it's saying maybe a recession, probably mild, probably short, or maybe not. But that's looking out 6-12 months historically. So I don't believe we're in a recession right here. It's pretty hard, if not impossible, to be in a recession with everything expanding. B, the odds of a recession have ticked up because of what the Fed has done. This last rate increase of 75 basis points is pretty substantial. If they do another 75 basis point increase at the meeting at the end of July, then I'm going to move into now we're really likely to see a recession, as opposed to, there's a possibility of a recession. So it's just shocking the system.
End of July? Is that what you said?
Yeah, it's the next FOMC meeting. I'll tell you exactly when it is.
Maybe we can. I'll schedule you on the program. All right, and last thing I want to, two more quick things, but just wanted to ask you about housing markets, because I know that you just had your friend, you introduced me to him, Jonathan Miller, on Masters in Business.
July 26th, 27th, by the way, is the next meeting.
July 26th.
Yeah, Jonathan Miller, he's an interesting guy, isn't he?
He's a smart guy, and he's a great resource on housing markets. I know you specifically talked about urban real estate, but if there's anything from that interview that you want to just mention, and people should go listen to Masters in Business and subscribe to it wherever you get your podcast. Barry hosts that. He had Jonathan Miller on. What about housing? I always like to ask you about housing markets, and a lot has changed, obviously, with interest rates. So what has that meant?
So there's a couple of reasons why housing was such a crazy set of circumstances. First, following the financial crisis, where we overbuilt and overextended credit, and basically went from I want to say it was like a 63% home ownership rate to like a 69%. It was just wildly, if you offer people who can't qualify for mortgages free money, well, they're going to take it, and they're going to want to raise their standard of living, especially after 3 or 4 decades of not seeing wage increases on the bottom half. And so we set up we overbuilt, and then following that crisis, we underbuilt housing for a decade. So there's not enough single family homes around generally. B, we ran into a situation during the pandemic when anyone who was stuck in a city in an apartment, there was a lot of lack of knowledge about how COVID was communicated. But I'm paying top dollar to live in a place that gives me access to all these cultural advantages, restaurants, theater, museums, and I can't use any of them. Why am I paying all this money? So all those people went out and bought, many of those people went out and bought second or third homes. Now, under normal circumstances, a couple gets married and move in together, they buy their first house. They're buying that first house from somebody, typically married couple, 1 kid, second on the way, they're moving to the bigger house. They're moving to the 3-bedroom. That person is moving to the 4-bedroom in the nicer neighborhood. That person is moving to the bigger house with the mountain views. That person is moving to the even nicer house with it's a whole chain of custody under normal circumstances. Right. For every buyer, there's a seller, including either the downsizer or the person who retires at the end of that chain.
That's the normal.
During the, let's call it 18 months of the lockdown, 2020, 2021, there was no chain. So people just went out and bought houses without selling anything. And it only takes a couple of quarters of that to go from a huge supply of housing sufficient to meet whoever wants to make a purchase at a reasonable price to there's no inventory, right? So Jonathan Miller, he lives in Fairfield, Connecticut. We were using that as an example. Pre-pandemic, in any given month, it'd be 200, 250 houses for sale in his town, right? And then in the midst of the pandemic, it dropped to 50, fell 75%. And then 3 months ago, it fell to 5, like just 12, 10. He was telling me it fell another 75, 80%. So now it's recovered back to 40 or 50, but it's still 75% below where it was in pre-pandemic level. Now we have a record number of new homes being constructed. We have record number of completions coming online since the pre-financial crisis. So supply is starting to catch up, but it's going to take a couple of years. The one thing that the Fed has done that is slowing the housing market is they raise rates enough so that mortgages are expensive. And now you've sort of put a cap on, at least on houses under $2 million, what people can afford to pay for it. By the way, all those big houses you see over $2 million, they're all cash purchases. People aren't doing that with mortgages. You go out and buy a $40 million house, you're not taking it out a loan.
Right. I knew that. Not
that your bank doesn't want you to, but most of those purchases are considered cash or cash-like. Sometimes the bank will, as a courtesy, extend credit to a giant customer.
Does any media outlet aggregate and cover who those people are? Are those deals commonly public? Because who can afford, who has that kind of cash to put down on a home? And is there a book about that, or a blog, or
so the interesting thing is that most of those big houses are bought through LLCs, meaning these privately held companies, and it's not Pete Dominic LLC.
Right.
It's she said LLC, and nobody really knows.
Right.
Who the buyer is. It's done on purpose for privacy reasons, most of which are legit, but you could see how around the borders that could really be abused.
Did you hear about those kids that like high school kids that broke into an $8 million mansion? I think it was in Florida, and they just had a party in the empty mansion. I'm like, why don't you hear that? And would you have gone as a teenager into an empty home and partied
of course.
at the? Yeah, right. Yes, for sure.
Well, I would not have participated in breaking in, but if one of my buddies said, "Hey, you going to Freddie's party this weekend? It's at so and so." I'm like, "Oh, I don't know that neighborhood. Oh, really nice. Yeah, I'll see you there. What can I bring? Bring some ice. See you there."
Why do I feel like it's more okay? It's more acceptable if it's somebody who has a mansion, but even though it's their personal home with their personal stuff in it, then some middle class home in the suburbs where you destroy everything, like those parties. I don't know. I'm more okay. I never felt comfortable going into somebody's house when they weren't home. But if it's a mansion, fine. I'm a dick. All right.
Because it's not a unrecoverable amount of damage. They could write a check and clean this up.
Right. Exactly. So finally, I wanted to ask you. You said I could. You just lost your mother, who was
86
and a half, and you said she passed away peaceably sleeping after a, I don't know if I can share all this, the emergency hip surgery.
Well, sure. So let me give you a little bit of...
and I asked if I could ask you about this. You didn't, because I thought people that listen to the show know you, they like you, they care about you, and you're interesting in every way. And I thought you would have something that you would draw from the loss of your mom that you would want to share publicly. That's all.
Sure. Well, there's a couple of... I'll share a couple of thoughts that I thought... obviously you start thinking about it a lot. The first thing is, I'm not exactly a practicing Jew, but I have to give my religion credit for managing death better than, growing up, I've been to wakes where the body is propped up in the corner.
Oh, yeah, those are my people you're talking about, the Catholics, yes.
The line of well-wishers lining up to kiss the occupant of the casket, and I'm like, whoa. I'm out. So the Jewish religion has a couple of things that are really, really savvy. First, next day in the ground, done. Second, the immediate family. When we say, "Well, I buried my mother last month," that is not a metaphor. You literally, when the service is done, and we did a graveside service. We had a rabbi who came straight out of Central Casting. He was perfect. And when the service is done, so I said a few words. My nephew said a few words. My brother couldn't. He was toast. My sister's husband said a few words because she was racked up. And then when you're done with the whole ceremony, and I have to say, this is a crazy sentence. My mom's funeral was just lovely. It was a beautiful June day. It was breezy. I hadn't been to that cemetery wall. Oh, there's my dad's plot, and then all the relatives I haven't seen in decades. So it was like a surreally, surprisingly good funeral. And at the end of the ceremony, you literally pick up the shovel, and everybody in the family does a few which is kind of my mom had a great sense of humor, very funny woman. And I remember at her mother's funeral, she was a little estranged from her mom, who was difficult, and she refused to. Some families just put a rock on the casket, others do the full thing. And I said, my mother refused to do it. I'm like, Ma, you're holding everybody up here. Nobody could get her to do it. And finally, I had to pull her aside. I go, I would do this for you. And she just broke up. And that's what got her to do it. She just started laughing. And that's what got her to throw the shovel full. And it was a very weird feeling having that inside joke between the two of us. And I'm like, oh, this actually has come true. Here it is, 30 years later. And now I'm doing it for her. So that was a little weird. And then you do a week of Shiva where
Barry, is it true? Is it true that it's the only time that Jews will actually pick up a shovel? Is that
arguably? That's right. Although I swung a sledgehammer in college, so
I think you do some of your own landscaping. Come on. All right. Sorry for my joke.
Yeah,
sorry for my anti-Semitic generalization. Go ahead.
But the concept of this very real sensation of this is of closure and this is real, and then you spend a week with people telling stories about friends and relatives come up, ridiculous, absurd amounts of food. Just endless platters and just nonstop. The woman who is our dog sitter and occasionally cleans the house, her local church runs a food pantry. And so each night we were just giving her just like ridiculous quantities of food. So we were feeding all of these people from that. But the two things the one other thing I really wanted to share that I thought was interesting. So I'm friendly with Professor Scott Galloway at NYU, who's written, a number of books. One of the books that I thought I would not like because they tend to be, a little hokey is The Algebra of Happiness. And in that book, he tells the story of selling his first company and being able to use the money to just hang out with his mom in the last year of her life when she was going through treatment that they knew what the ending was. And I found his description of about his gratitude for being able to do that somewhat inspiring. And so it kind of opened my eyes a little bit to, hey, don't take your family members who are still around for granted. Right. By the way, he and I have swapped, letters about this, emails about this. So after we went down in January 2020 to put a pacemaker in my mom, which really bought her another 2.5 years that she wouldn't have had anyway. And my sister gets full credit for that. The previous year or 2 years before that, she had her cataracts done. My mom was like 84, had better eyesight than, didn't need reading glasses. So I thank Galloway for, hey, I really appreciate what you the personal thing you wrote about your mom. It really opened my eyes in 2020, 2021 that, hey, time is limited and it's really an incredible luxury to be able to spend time with your parents, especially when they're older. After the vaccines came out, my brother, who works in pharmaceuticals, was vaccinated early. He flew down, he got mom, brought her back up here where we moved her into a place pretty much equidistant between the three kids, and really got to spend the last year and change of her life with her, seeing her pretty regularly. My sister saw her every Tuesday. I saw her as often as I could, 4 times a month, plus all the holidays, the Jewish holidays, we didn't see her for Thanksgiving, but Mother's Day, all that sort of stuff. And, I have to give credit to Galloway for really, we all sort of travel through life a little oblivious and a little unaware of our own limited time on the planet. And we just take everything for granted. It's a natural human tendency. And so he kind of really woke me up to, hey, mom's not going to be here forever. Right. And, you don't want to find yourself looking back with regret. Gee, I wish I would have seen her more often. Right. Gee, I have some money. I wish I could have done something to bring her up here, find her a nicer place to live, find her an aide. So the one small positive of this is I don't feel like I have any regrets.
That's awesome.
Other than it's just so surreal to think there's a person in your life, your entire life, and suddenly you're never going to see them again. Which, by the way, is true about everybody you know. It's just a question of whether they get to think that about you or you get to think that about them, depending on who goes first. So, all things considered, 86.5 is a great run. That's a pretty good year, pretty good lifespan. She was healthy just about all of her life.
Awesome.
And still, she still knew who everybody was. She still, if you asked her who the president was, she couldn't care less. But she knew her kids and her grandkids' names, and she was here to see her great grandkid be born. And we got to spend a lot of time with her. And we didn't think it was going to be the last year of her life, but that's what it turned out to be. So
I appreciate you sharing that with us, and we're obviously sorry for your loss, but that was very valuable to hear from you, and I'm sure people will reach out to you and say the same. Thank you very much for an hour of your very valuable time, Barry Ritholtz. You have been awesome. Can
I share one thing with you? Normally this isn't the sort of thing I would speak about.
No, I asked you to.
But you know what? But what was my first reaction?
Well,
my initial reaction was no, and then I stopped for a moment and recalled somebody I'm friendly with, Michael Lewis, who one of all of ours favorite author, and last year, a little over a year ago, he lost his daughter in a terrible car accident, and a mutual friend, a few months afterwards, I think it was like August, so it was barely 3 months afterwards, I said, gee, I feel terrible about Michael, but I don't want to bother him. She said, he would love to hear from you. Don't even hesitate.
Yeah.
And so I took her advice. I called him, and we had a really lovely conversation. He's a lovely guy. And I thought that would be the last I would ever hear about it. And then he did a podcast with Will Arnott and what's his name from Arrested Development, the rest of the anyway, Justine Bateman and
Jason Bateman, not Justine Bateman.
What did I say?
You said Justine Bateman. You said Mallory from Family Ties, and it was Jason Bateman that was on Arrested Development.
Jason Bateman, that's right.
So he does a podcast.
Well, I'm lost in thought about. So anyway, he told the story about how he lost his daughter and what it meant to him that everybody else had reached out. And, when we spoke, he had said, you don't realize how lucky you are in your life until some misfortune befalls you. And then suddenly it's like, oh, I've been instead of going down a black hole and being really depressed, he's like, oh, gee, we've had no bad luck for 60 years, and suddenly a little bad luck hits. You have to use it as an opportunity to appreciate all the good luck you've had before.
Yeah.
And I just thought the fact that he could speak about that publicly meant that I had to just power through and say a few words. So I'm glad you asked.
Yes, and I'm glad that you said yes. And I said, can you talk about your mom passing away for 14 hours? And you're like, I don't want to do it for that long. How about a few minutes at the end? So I appreciate that you're a man of compromise. Thank you very much. I
don't know about that. I thought I gave it a second thought and realized, all right, maybe it's of value to some people. I'm always surprised when I'll get the email or the direct message from someone who says, hey, I'm going through X like you are, and I appreciate what you said or wrote.
We should all be that way. Those of us who have any kind of platform, I mean, I don't want to should anybody, but I think when we do, it is helpful to let people know, hey, you're not alone. Right. This is part of the human experience. So.
Right.
All right. And
I just wish I didn't have to look at you when we do.
Yeah, that's true. You didn't look at me. But thank you, by the way, for wearing the uniform for the Stand Up with Pete Dominic podcast. We're both wearing the exact same color T-shirt, a salmonish reddish T-shirt, and I look better.
And we almost have the same color hair.
That's
only
right.
Mine's on the top of my head.
Oh,
and yours is on the bottom.
That's
Although now that I'm looking at it, you're much grayer than me.
on the bottom. Yeah. But I'm also a bottom. That was a weird way to end.
All right. So I guess that means I'm a top. So
I'll see you in an hour.
I'll see you. Right.
Love you, buddy. Thank you.
All right, man.
Well, there you go. Barry Ritholtz, everybody. How did you like it? I hope you got a lot out of that conversation, including that last part about losing his mom and the Jewish traditions and my anti-Semitic joke about shovels and all of that. I always love talking to Ritholtz, but that definitely was one of the best, I think. So hopefully you appreciated it. Let him know if you did. At Ritholtz. Check out his podcast, Masters in Business. Read his blog. Subscribe to his daily reads, which are always great. And that's it. I'll talk to you tomorrow. I hope you're doing okay today. I love you. We're here. You're not alone if you're part of our community. Sign up now. StandUpWithPete.com. This is my job, and I need your paid subscription for as little as $5 a month or more. Edit your subscription up, and that's it. John Carroll, singer-songwriter, Grammy Award-winning artist. Check him out at johncarroll.org. Take us out with our song that he wrote just for us.
I think you're driving wheels with leaking grease. Boy, you better stand up. Stand up. Well, there's a whole lot more of us who know us right. They'll keep right on ignoring us if we keep sitting tight. You got to open up the window to let in some light. You got to stand up. That's right. You got to rise up. You got to stand up. You got to stare the devil straight in the eye. We got to let him know it's his turn to go. See it clear and all you hear is a lie. Don't get up off of your butt, get down off of your fence. Even if it ain't a very friendly audience, well, they'll begin to listen when you start making sense. And you stand up, stand up. No need to point your rifle to defend your town. Just stand up, stand up. You know they can't deny you what you're laying down. Boy, you better stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up, we got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up, you got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.